Some say the horizon is the thin line between heaven and earth. And when you're young and having a good time, you're not so worried about walking that line. But now I see. It takes just one step to lead you to a bright new beginning or a dark and deadly end. Florida is the most colorful place I ever knew. Purple skies, pink houses, and orange trees. This was home, and I loved it.
She loved the sun. She loved just the weather, that you could always do anything, any time of the day. Teresa wanted to stay right here in Lakeland and live her life.
Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. But who needs it when you already live where the rest of the world vacations?
She was always able to make us feel like anything was possible. She would make pretend castles. She would make pretend beaches out in the backyard. She would do whatever it took to make us feel better.
Life is what you make of it, after all. And as I got older, I made sure mine was full of good times.
Teresa just wanted everybody around her to smile. She wanted everybody to be happy. She was always trying to get people together to have a good time.
And when Friday rolled around, I just never could resist a big night out on the town.
Teresa and I had made plans to go to dinner and to go to a club. At the last minute, I had to cancel my plans with her. She decided she would just go hang out with some friends. And that was the last time I talked to her.
We ended up at one of my favorite spots, where the tables were cracking and the jukebox was playing the soundtrack to my life. I never wanted the night to end. But as my mom used to say, there's no joy and laughter in the morning after.
Police dispatch received a call early Saturday morning in reference to a car that had driven off into Lake Hollingsworth. When the officer arrived, he was expecting to see maybe a drunk or somebody that had passed out at the wheel and just driven off into the lake.
He went down to the vehicle, peered into the back seat, and to his surprise, there was a nude female laying in the back. There was blood spatter all over the door, blood all over the seat. He checked her pulse, and she was deceased.
There appeared to be 3 stab wounds on her chest, a large laceration, and it was obvious that foul play had taken place that night. It appeared that she had undressed in the back seat. Whether she was sexually battered, we didn't know.
I knew everything those investigators didn't. I wish it wasn't so. But all my wishes disappeared the night I died.
Yeah, whoever did this, obviously when they put the vehicle into the lake, it was their goal for the vehicle to be completely submerged to destroy any evidence. They got stuck because there's a lot of mud in that lake. It's very shallow at that particular point.
At that time, we had a female deceased in the back seat of a car, and we did not know who could have committed a crime.
People always said I was the kind of girl who lived each day like it was my last. But nobody is ever prepared when that day actually comes.
I heard a knock at the door, and when I opened it, there was 3 gentlemen standing there. 2 were Lakeland police detectives and a priest. And they needed someone to look at a picture, because they thought it was my daughter. Just couldn't comprehend that this would have happened to Teresa.
Sometimes the truth is hard to believe, and when it involves the people you love, it's nearly impossible.
I had just talked to Teresa 8 hours prior to, and then they found her in Lake Hollingsworth. It was just unbelievable.
My sister knew me like nobody else, and knew exactly who investigators should talk to first.
Teresa's sister Tina ended up telling us that Teresa had a boyfriend named Ted Buckner, and that Ted and Teresa often argued.
Teresa's relationship with her boyfriend was violent. She didn't want to leave her boyfriend because she thought she was pregnant.
Ted and I had been dating on and off for a couple of years. And I'm not gonna lie, he could be a little rough around the edges.
I told the detectives to please check out the boyfriend. Please investigate him.
Tina told us that Ted was known to carry a large knife with a large blade. The fact that Teresa may be pregnant, that they had this on and off relationship, certainly raised concerns that we needed to look into.
When it came down to it, I knew Ted wasn't the marrying type, but I sure didn't think he was the murdering type. Like most kids growing up, I trusted everyone I met, and I guess that never changed much. But trusting the wrong person can leave you vulnerable to all sorts of trouble.
Teresa didn't see any bad in the world. Teresa didn't have strangers in her life. Everybody was her friend. She had a few friends that I think she shouldn't have made friends with. Teresa's boyfriend was very mean. He was very controlling. She was in a very abusive relationship. When I spoke to the detectives, I told them that they needed to investigate him with their eyes wide open because he did carry weapons.
It's not unusual to have a knife here in Polk County, Florida, but the fact that Teresa may be pregnant, that they had this on and off relationship, certainly raised concerns that we needed to look into.
We located the boyfriend, and we noticed that he was somewhat nervous.
Ted denied any involvement whatsoever in Teresa Comfort's murder. He said he had no knowledge whatsoever that she may be pregnant.
Playing dumb came easily to Ted, but this time, no one knew if he was faking or telling the truth.
Ted said that as far as about the time that Teresa was killed, he said that he was fishing with friends over in the bay, and that he returned home at around 4 o'clock in the morning.
Looks like me and Ted were both down by the water the night I died. Thing is, he might be sinking deeper than he could have ever imagined.
He provides us with the names of 3 witnesses that he'd been out fishing with.
We were able to contact the individuals, and they did corroborate the fact that they all had went fishing the night that Teresa was killed.
It turns out, Ted wasn't Mr. Right for me or for the cops.
The autopsy report come back that Teresa was not pregnant. At that point, we knew we had to move on to new suspects.
I guess you could say Ted was off the hook. But the truth of it all didn't help my family's pain.
If I would have found out Teresa was pregnant when she had died, it would have made it twice as bad. But it didn't make anything easier.
After Teresa's boyfriend was cleared, we just didn't know who could have done it.
I held all the answers to everyone's questions. But to find them, investigators needed to retrace my steps the night I died.
We wanted to find out who Teresa was last with, where she worked at, and any of her friends or associates.
We had to broaden our investigation, and that led us to Laura Clark, a co-worker of Teresa's. And she said that she had, in fact, been with Teresa Comfort that evening, that they went to a local pool hall by the name of T.A. Slammers.
Like me, Laura was always up for a good time. And that night, Slammers was packed with the usual suspects.
Laura Clark was able to tell us that she noticed Teresa having conversation with an individual in the pool hall. Laura was able to describe the individual, a white male, short hair, wearing a cap on his head that was camouflage, kind of like a fishing type cap. Eventually, Laura and Teresa went their separate ways.
And that was the last time that she saw Teresa Comfort alive.
That's one of the things I used to love about Friday nights. You never knew who you might bump into.
We continue with the investigation by having a composite drawing done of the individual that Teresa was seen with there at the pool hall.
We were able to put together this composite sketch and get that out there for the general public and for the officers to see. And then we went to T.A. Slammers to talk with everyone that was in that bar that night and identify who this guy was seen with Teresa Comfort.
Like most everyone else in that pool hall, detectives made a beeline right to the bar.
The bartender was shown a picture of Teresa Comfort and remembered her. He also remembered seeing her with a white male subject, and further said that he remembered the fishing hat.
There isn't a man in Florida who doesn't own a fishing cap. And if you ask me, they all look the same. But this one was just a little different.
He noticed not only the fishing hat, but he noticed a pin on it that said Watershed 1993.
Watershed 1993 didn't mean a thing to me, but for investigators, it could mean everything.
We put a nationwide search out to all law enforcement agencies to help us identify that pin.
The next day, we were contacted by the New Jersey Game and Fishing Commission and advised that that is a membership pin that they issued. We asked them for a list of all their members and any identifying information such as photos. We were hoping that with receiving this list that we would be able to identify the suspect who was last with Teresa.
If a guy gets a license to hunt and fish, I guess he planned to use it. Question is, what exactly did he intend to kill? No arguing that the weather in Florida is kind of moody. One minute, it's as clear as glass. The next, a storm as dark as night can stop you dead in your tracks.
It's the hardest thing I had ever done in my life, to go to a funeral home and make arrangements for my daughter. You shouldn't have to bury your children. They should be burying you.
Time goes slow when you're grieving the loss of someone you love. And I suppose the same can be said for trying to catch a killer.
We were waiting on a list from the New Jersey Game and Fish Commission in regards to the Watershed 1993 pin that was observed on the individual last seen with Teresa at the pool hall.
But as it turns out, investigators weren't exactly shooting fish in a barrel.
So the next day we get this list of every single member that had been issued a permit. It's got hundreds of names on it.
The list was so long that to be able to know how they might be connected or whether they was involved in this crime was almost an impossibility. But the other hope we had was possibility of photos or some other information that might closer tie us to our suspect, and those weren't able to be sent. So all we had was lists and lists of names and no connection to Teresa at that time.
I always said that if bar walls could talk, they'd have some mighty big secrets. And the answer to who killed me was one of them.
We didn't understand how a sketch could be done, and they couldn't figure out who the guy was.
Somebody's still out there. And that was the scariest thing to me, because I was afraid they'd never catch who did it.
No one expected my killer to drop out of the sky with the afternoon rain. But sometimes when you least expect it, things have a funny way of happening.
Weeks into the investigation, we received a call from New Jersey State Police advising that they'd received a phone call from a woman who advised that her nephew had contacted her and said that he was present when a woman was stabbed in Lakeland, Florida.
We asked what his name was, and they said John Paul Girbala.
Suddenly, that long list of New Jersey fishermen was about to get a whole lot shorter.
We went down the list of all those names, and there was John Girbala.
We were able to get a photograph from his Florida driver's license. We showed it to Teresa's friend, Lori Clark, and she immediately recognized John as the guy that Teresa Comfort left with that night from T.A. Slammers.
Based on the conversations the aunt in New Jersey had had with John Gerbala, it was apparent that John and Mark Leland were on the run, and we needed to find them.
The chase was on, and investigators were betting these guys were going to be their catch of the day. I know now blood is thicker than water, and family always comes first. But when it comes to murder, some family ties are better off broken.
Weeks into the investigation, we were contacted by a New Jersey woman who advised that her nephew had contacted her and said that he was present when a woman was stabbed in Lakeland, Florida. We were able to identify the nephew as John Gerbala. Since the aunt had already been contacted by John Gerbala, the phone of the aunts in New Jersey was tapped so that we'd have a trace on the phone if he did recontact her.
A guilty conscience can send you running, and it can also get you talking.
Within a couple days, John Gerbala did call back from a payphone in Portland, Oregon. We contacted a violent crimes task force with the FBI, and within a short time, John Gerbala and Mark Leland were apprehended.
In a lot of ways, Oregon is about as far from Florida as you can get, but not far enough to escape Lakeland's finest.
Once we'd arrived in Portland, Oregon, we opted to talk to Mark first.
We kept pressing Mark over and over again during this interview. It took a couple hours, and finally he cracked. And he said, I'm going to tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you exactly who killed Teresa Comfort. And that person is John Paul Gerbala.
If this guy was supposed to be John's friend, I'd hate to see his enemies.
Mark told us that they met Teresa Comfort at T.A. Slammers, and they left to go buy cigarettes.
Mark Leland told us that John was making sexual advances to Teresa.
At some point, John pulls off the side of the road, and all of a sudden he demands that Teresa take her clothes off. At that point, Teresa felt like her life was in danger. She takes her clothes off, and she's pleading for her life.
I begged that boy to leave me alone, but the more I begged, the madder he got.
John Gerbala became enraged, pulled out a knife, and stabbed Teresa Comfort in the back seat of the car.
And Mark he's in shock. He doesn't know what to do. It happened so quick. At that point, John comes up with the idea, we need to dispose of the vehicle. And he drives it down to Lake Hollingsworth. Mark gets out. John puts it in drive, shoots it off into the water, hoping that it submerges, but it doesn't.
I guess John was hoping to wash away all the horrible things he'd done. But some things, you can't ever get rid of.
Mark warned us that John was going to tell us a false story, that a third person had got in the car and that person was the one that had killed Teresa Comfort. And when we sat down with John, sure enough, he started in on the story of the third man getting in and killing Teresa Comfort, telling us that false story, and we knew we had our man.
Not only did John's plan get stuck in the mud, but his story was now caught in a web of lies.
We told him that Mark was going to be a witness against him in the crime. He got real quiet, said he wanted to talk to an attorney. And based on the fact that we did have Mark as a witness, we were able to charge John Gerbala with first-degree murder of Teresa Comfort.
I really did believe you could find a little good in everybody, till I met the one who was rotten to the core.
When they found the guy that did this, and I found out he didn't even know her, he didn't know the kind of person she was, why would he take her life?
All we could think was, this is someone that she probably said hi to and he killed her.
When I met John, he seemed so big and tough, but in the end, he was nothing but a coward who didn't want to face a judge and jury.
The investigators brought him to Polk County, and he admitted to killing her. He didn't want a lengthy trial.
Shortly thereafter, he did accept a plea agreement for second-degree murder.
I suppose you could say justice was served, because John was going away for a long time. But I was gone for good, and there's no justice in that, especially for my family.
Teresa's in my mind day after day. I never, ever go a day without thinking about Teresa. I have a bad day, I think of Teresa saying, "Ma, it's fine, let's just smile and get through the day." I miss my daughter.
I must have watched 1,000 sunsets while I was alive, and wish I could see 1,000 more. And looking off into the horizon was almost like seeing the line between heaven and earth. They're not so far apart, you know. Some say the horizon is the thin line between heaven and earth. And when you're young and having a good time, you're not so worried about walking that line. But now I see. It takes just one step to lead you to a bright new beginning, or a dark and deadly end. Florida is the most colorful place I ever knew. Purple skies, pink houses, and orange trees. This was home, and I loved it.
She loved the sun. She loved just the weather, that you could always do anything, any time of the day. Teresa wanted to stay right here in Lakeland and live her life.
Growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. But who needs it when you already live where the rest of the world vacations?
She was always able to make us feel like anything was possible. She would make pretend castles. She would make pretend beaches out in the backyard. She would do whatever it took to make us feel better.
Life is what you make of it, after all. And as I got older, I made sure mine was full of good times.
Teresa just wanted everybody around her to smile. She wanted everybody to be happy. She was always trying to get people together to have a good time.
And when Friday rolled around, I just never could resist a big night out on the town.
Teresa and I had made plans to go to dinner and to go to a club. At the last minute, I had to cancel my plans with her. She decided she would just go hang out with some friends. And that was the last time I talked to her.
We ended up at one of my favorite spots, where the tables were cracking and the jukebox was playing the soundtrack to my life. I never wanted the night to end, but as my mom used to say, there's no joy and laughter in the morning after.
Police dispatch received a call early Saturday morning in reference to a car that had driven off into Lake Hollingsworth. When the officer arrived, he was expecting to see maybe a drunk or somebody that had passed out at the wheel and just driven off into the lake.
He went down to the vehicle, peered into the back seat, and to his surprise, there was a nude female laying in the back. There was blood spatter all over the door, blood all over the seat. He checked her pulse, and she was deceased.